Unbound Theatre presents The Chronicles of Professor Chronomier, Temper and Temporality, written by Dario Knight and performed by Erika Sanderson. Chapter 9. The Nexus. The professor awoke on a cool metal floor. The relief of no longer being suspended in space escaped her in an exhausted chuckle, and she patted the hard surface with one hand while she pushed herself up to her feet with the other. She was uneasy to begin with, her legs trembling after the flight through the fog. She reached out and leant against the wall to steady herself, and the tingle of heat under her fingers snapped her out of her hazy disorientation. The wall was covered in a gaudy pattern of powder blue light. Her eyes followed it, curving inwardly away from her and pulsing ever so slightly like a faint heartbeat. It was then that she saw the extraordinary centrepiece of the unfamiliar room, and her mouth opened in awe. Hanging in mid-air before her was a constellation of golden stars, orbs of light bobbing gently whilst a purple web of what appeared to be static threaded itself around them. She took a step forward and realised that within each globe there were images, only rather than still frames they were moving and shifting like something from a zoetrope. Leaning closer to the nearest orb, she peered into the golden glow and a face she recognised rose to the surface of it. It was Jane. Not the Jane she had left behind in 1804. This one was older, and her appearance immediately brought to mind a portrait she had seen in books back in her own time. All uncertainty evaporated from her mind. Now she knew for certain what was going on. A flame rose in her stomach, but it flickered when another face flashed past her. "Astrid!" she breathed, pacing around the web of light to follow the face. Not contained within one of the golden spheres, Astrid's figure sputtered along the purple tendrils of light. She looked anguished, and the professor could see the tiny projection's lips mouthing her name. "Oh, Astrid, dear heart, where are you? I'll find you. I promise I'll—" A buzzing sound cut her off, and the pale blue pattern on the walls became darker. A soft but certain voice filled the air. "Intruder in Nexus Suite 4. Guard drones dispatched. Intruder in Nexus Suite 4. Guard drones dispatched. Intruder in Nexus." A panel slid open and white light spilled into the room. Shadows shifted in the corridor beyond, and the professor braced herself. She backed away and followed the wall around the chamber, looking for another exit. She found none. As a high-pitched hum grew somewhere along the corridor, she glanced across the chamber and saw that a huge, bulky throne stood before the galaxy of orbs in the centre of the room. The florid thread thickened as it stretched through the air towards it, gathering in a large purple web above the back of the chair. She tried to determine who was sat upon it, but the glaring lights hid the occupant from view. The humming grew even louder, and an astonishing floating device hovered through the open door. It looked almost like a model bird, moulded from a shiny white material which reflected the golden spheres as pinpricks of light upon its surface. Two curved wings extended from the object's body, and at the end of each of them seemed to be a blur of movement, rotating blades lifting what she took to be the aforementioned guard drone up into the air. The drone flew steadily into the room and paused before the light display. The professor froze, wondering if it was somehow able to detect her presence. Soon a second drone hovered into the room, and then a third. After a pause, two of the devices began to trace the outline of the room, each heading in a different direction, whilst the third remained beside the door. She watched as the drone heading for her side of the room turned in the air as though scanning the chamber. Finally it alighted on her and paused. A small light to the side of what looked like a minuscule lens flashed, and the soothing voice sounded again. "Target identified. Incapacitate and contain." "I don't think so, my featherless friend," the professor called, and ducked as a beam of light blasted from the drone and hit the wall behind where she'd been standing. Immediately the drone quickened its flight and followed her as she dashed around the room, into the path of the second pursuing machine. She saw its artificial eye glow, and a thought struck her. She removed her hat and held it high above her head. "Lovely to meet you," she beamed, and the drone tilted back, firing a bolt of energy directly at the hat, only for it to be whipped out of sight. The blast hit the first drone and it shattered into pieces, sparks and splinters of molten casing spraying the room. The Professor was already on the move, dashing beneath the first drone and towards the third, guarding the only exit. She moved too quickly for it and ducked beneath. "Cheerio!" she cried as she disappeared from view. The remaining drones turned and followed. "Intruder has left Nexus Suite 4, the voice informed some unknown audience, and filling the startlingly bright white corridor the Professor was now running along. "Oh, it's like having my own narrator," she grinned, then turned a corner. She could hear the dual buzzing sounds of the drones pursuing her, their pitch growing higher as they increased their speed. She looked around the passageway for something, anything to help her incapacitate the flying hunters, but the walls, floor and ceiling were smooth like the inside of a pipe. She patted down her many pockets, and an idea zapped across her synapses. The two drones hurtled along the corridor, tracing the heat signature of the intruder. Slowing in readiness to turn a corner, the one in front tilted and began to maneuver when a metal chain shot through the air and wrapped itself around one of its wings. Before it could fire a defensive blast, it was pulled sharply from the air and crashed to the floor, its propellers shattering on impact and its power source rupturing. "Sorry, birdie," the Professor muttered, picking up the fallen drone and pocketing her watch chain. "Oh, I would dearly love to take you apart and see how you work, but now's not the time." The final drone whirred into view and paused as the Professor stepped in front of it. "Sorry, old chap, I've wrongs to right." She hoisted the remains of the second drone over her shoulder, then hurled it at the third. It sent out a blast at the approaching missile, but the flaming wreckage held its course and smashed it out of the air. Both tumbled onto the floor, sparking and fizzing. The Professor stood before them. "How many more of you are there, I wonder?" She carefully stepped over the wreckage and ran back along the corridor towards the chamber she had arrived in moments earlier. Keeping an ear tuned for more of the drone's incessant whirring, the Professor found the doorway to Nexus Suite 4. As she approached, it began to slide shut, but a frantic dash forward ensured she was inside when it closed. Wasting no time, she walked over to the throne sat before the network of golden spheres. She was not surprised by the identity of the occupant, who was sat stock still, eyes closed as though in a trance. His clothes might have been different, but his face was the same. "All right, Raleigh. Time to find out who you are," she said in a low voice before looking over at another familiar face, this time inside one of the glowing orbs. "And what exactly you want with Jane Austen." The Chronicles of Professor Chronomier, Temper and Temporality, an Unbound theatre production, written by Dario and performed by Erika Sanderson, with music by Kevin MacLeod.